Now we're going to look at another bit of manuscript production, another illuminated manuscript. In this case, it's going to be the Psalter of St. Louis, depicting Abraham and the three angels. Now, this is from Louis's personal prayer book, so this is not the moralizing Bible. This would be his personal prayer book. And what we see is 78 full-page miniatures. We see Old Testament subject matters, which are models for the king's conduct. Abraham becoming a type of spiritual leader. The colors are also very similar to what we've seen in stained glass, with the addition of gold from the Byzantine. This idea that a gold background tells us that this is something religious, spiritual, divine, not something of this world. And it's probably created by the same workshop that produced the windows for Sainte-Chapelle. And this is entirely in the Rayonnant style. When we look around the exterior, first starting with the border, we see this repetition similar to what we see with the Rayonnant, with a bit of a difference. If you pay attention, you'll notice we have these dragon forms in the corners, and their tails kind of creating a knotwork. It's a simplified Celtic knotwork coming to us from the medieval, but being used here in the Gothic. In terms of the Rayonnant style, you see this repetition in the tree of the leaves, using them almost like a decorative pattern, as well as a repetition in the background, showing what looks very similar to Sainte-Chapelle in the background, something that Louis would have related to. And in the foreground, we have this specific story, one that we've seen before in the Byzantine, where three angels disguise themselves, and they appear to Abraham. Their purpose being to prove that Abraham's a good person. We know it's Abraham because of this hat. It's symbolic at the time of Abraham. But they disguise themselves, they appear to Abraham, and demand hospitality. And at the time, if anyone demands hospitality, you're supposed to give it to them, because this is not a time with hotels and such. You're supposed to be a good person and help out your fellow man. He does. He provides the food, which we see here. The angels are impressed, and his wife oversees this and knows that this will be a positive thing for her, in this case leading to the birth of Isaac. So the reason that this is here in the Paris Psalter, or in the Psalter of St. Louis, is that it's showing him that he has to have that same sort of servitude and sense of hospitality that Abraham had, that he needs to serve his people, that he should not simply rule over them. So, important lesson for him at the time. Now this brings us to Carcassonne in France. And at this time, during the Gothic, we see frequent warfare, especially in continental Europe. We have feudal barons who often built fortified castles, as well as entire towns surrounding them. The idea being, well, let's go here, and this will make it more obvious, that you build your castle within the town. In this case, the castle's over here. And then you build the town. Here's the church. And then you wall the whole thing off. The people who live inside tend to be the middle class, the shop owners, the traders, the merchants. And then the villagers would live outside, much like you see today, this sort of town having grown up around it. But they'd have strip farms that would grow out from the walls. The idea being, if there's ever an invasion, the peasants or pheasants, whichever, can come in and they can find refuge within the city. And if the city is taken, then everyone finds refuge, or the important people really, find refuge within the castle. So you always have a fallback position. The villagers, of course, during a siege would lose everything because their homes are unprotected being outside those walls. So this was built on a hill for defense, and the city is fortified. Actually, it had been fortified since Roman times, and it's reinforced in the 12th century. And what we see here is a restoration. So they've obviously rebuilt it, complete with a car park in the back here, just like Disneyland. And they're doing this to show you what these towns would have looked like. Now, these towns will exist until about the 13th, 14th century, at which point gunpowder comes into play. And against a cannon, no wall can stand, because no matter how thick you build the walls, eventually I'm going to be able to knock it down. It may take 100 cannonballs, but it's going to happen. So this whole thing eventually becomes quite pointless. But it does show you how these medieval and Gothic towns would have been laid out, and some of their social structure. The fact that the common man is not inside the walls, doesn't have a house inside the walls. They're outside, and only the middle class and the upper class are inside the walls of these towns.